It is so good to see so many people that have joined us today and taken the time out to spend a bit of time with Jason English, who's one of our alumni. And we are very proud that we finally managed to secure this time with him because, Jason, you are really, really, really busy. And for those of you who follow Jason on LinkedIn, he's all over the place. So welcome to everybody, and most especially to you, Jason. Yes, I have heard lots about you. I've read lots about you. We haven't actually met in person, but I'm hoping, you never know, one day I'll get to Dubai or somewhere where you are. But I'm going to do a short introduction, but it's actually the amount that you have accomplished and have done as I was going through everything, and I'm thinking, goodness. So let me start so that we can start our chat. So I'm sure everybody's aware Jason is an entrepreneur. He's best known for his philosophy in building company culture, which I think we all know, or hopefully we all know or are realizing it is a huge, huge part of any kind of business to get your strategy working. So building company culture is a big thing. And he's documented this in his book called The Oros Effect. And I think, Jason, this is still going to be released, am I right? Fairly soon. So we'll be having a book launch as well, which we really, you didn't know that, but I'm just telling you, we will be. Just to really, it sounds very exciting. To give you a little bit more info, as I've said, Jason completed his MBA with Milpark. He's also done another MBA, which we'll chat about what he's learned from his MBAs a little bit later. But he also studied mechanical engineering. So a clever chap. He's also a tech enthusiast who has been featured across multiple media channels. And it's for his leadership perspectives on, now this is amazing, scaling a group of companies that employ over 5,000 people across South Africa, the Middle East, and the UK. That is something in itself. So hopefully we can also chat about that in terms of how you did that. He's an expert in digital transformation and culture. And as you know, he's written this book that we're waiting for. And now comes the very exciting bits. Jason has said he's a failed Formula One driver, which I don't think you fail at anything. But he is an adrenaline junkie. So he is a helicopter pilot. He is a commercial drone pilot. He's still involved with Formula One. So he's all over doing such exciting things. And then he was also selected by Peter Diamandis, who is a guru, as one of 250 global thought leaders on futuristic technology. And he was voted in 2021 the MENA region's Technology Leader of the Year by Ventures Connect. So really, Jason, you are up there with the gurus of tech, and you are doing amazing things. A few more nuggets. Jason has served on the world's largest innovation board in San Francisco, and he currently serves on the board of YPO MENA, and he's the co-chair of YPO's speaker community. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is and your involvement in that and why it's important to you. Some more. Before you start blushing, Jason, he's a certified strategic game plan coach, and he runs strategy sessions on purpose, vision, and values, which again, that speaks to culture and how to make a successful business, which you know a huge amount about. And last but not least, Jason has spoken at many conferences worldwide, but he also enjoys supporting the careers of those people around him. So a good and a valuable person to mentor you and to get advice from. And I think, Jason, you give a lot of your time to other people, which, you know, from a community and in a global scenario is so valuable. So after a few nuggets of information, I'll start off with one question because it's been fascinating me since knowing about this. You do a myriad of activities and business activities, and how do you fit everything in? You've got the same amount of time in a day that we all have. How do you do it? What is your game plan? Give us we need the silver bullet here.
So firstly, welcome everybody, and thanks for having. It's always good to come back to your roots, I guess, and have a good chat with what no doubt was a big part of my life, spending 2 years driving up and down to come to lectures and do all of that. So it's really good to be able to give back. I think the answer to your question is I'm not quite sure, and when you figure it out and I figure it out, could you please let me know? But look, I think on a more serious note, obviously, when you're driven by, when you're not doing things just because you're chasing things and you're doing things because there's a reason and value, it never really feels like a job. It feels like, something that's a bit of fun. And so I guess you find the time to do the things that you love, right? If you're enthusiastic, it's crazy, but at the end of the day, it's just finding what you're passionate about and making sure that you go out there and just find the time to do it. That's ultimately, there's no perfect answer to that, I don't think. And I get asked this question all the time, and I don't have the answer to it. It's just I sleep very little. I spend a lot of time away from the people that are important to me. So I do sacrifice, family, my spouse, and my kids. But I think, like in life, everything comes in a bit of sacrifice. The one thing I will say is, and just for everybody that's listening, this is not a rehearsed call. So I made it very clear to Milpark. I was like, look, I don't like to practice or understand. Just ask me whatever. I'd encourage you as the audience to also just ask questions that you feel are important, whatever it is. You've got my time. I'd love to share any experiences. But I live my life in what I call a wealth triangle. So the triangle is really made up of 3 points, and that's wealth, freedom, and meaning. And I think the key thing for me is that it's finding the balance between wealth, freedom, and meaning, which is the important thing. So, there's when you're a tech startup, you don't have any meaning. you certainly don't have any time. Very often you're broke too, but you'll spend so much time trying to build your wealth, and that's where your focus has to be. The flip side is true. When you're super wealthy, you start to look at how do I find the meaning in my life, and use that money for purpose. And of course, you can have, if you don't have freedom, or if you have all the freedom, be miserable. So to sum it up, I kind of say this: you can be the wealthiest person in the world. If you have no freedom and you have no meaning, you're miserable. You can have all the time in the world. So you can have no job. You can be excuse the word, but a hobo. And you've got all the time, but you've got no money, and you've got meaning. You're ultimately going to be miserable. And so it's just constantly finding that balance and recognizing when you're out of kilt on the balance, and trying to then spend a little bit more time doing that. And I think that's how I just manage it, and somehow it seems to get me around the block.
Sure, I really like that idea with that triangle, because I think a lot of us always talk about balance, and then you look at your life as a wheel kind of thing, but it can never be totally in balance. So you're always going to be slightly out of kilter. But I really like the idea of looking at your wealth and your freedom, because wealth is wealth in, I suppose, currency, money ways, but as well as finding your meaning and your purpose and your vision, and then how you give back, which is where you get a lot back. So I'm actually going to take that. I've already learned something, so I can go and dine off that for a while. I'm going to think about that. You've now taken time out to write your book, and that's no small thing to do. Give us a summary of, just in a few sentences, is kind of what is it about the Oros effect. I see somebody up here as well wants to know if that's an acronym that you created. How did you come up about the name? And then essentially, like, what is the essence of that book?
Firstly, the Oros is not an acronym. It's very much related to the Oros drink that we all know and grew up with as children. In my book, I referenced it as being, it's such a popular drink because it's a huge sugar rush that it kind of gave us. But the long and the short is that the book is about a concept. If you think of yourself as an individual, and I'll use the business context, if I think of me as a leader, I am a bottle of concentrated Oros. And what that looks like is, in the bottle, I'm a bright orange. It's my ideas, my vision, my beliefs, my values. It's everything that I think about and stand for as an individual. And the moment I start hiring more people, a lot of businesses, what they don't do the transfer of that concentrate through to all the people on the ground. And so the concept of the Oros effect is actually, how do you make sure that you take that deep, rich Oros, and as you're filling up all the glasses and layers of glasses below you, that you don't get this dilution of what you initially stood for as a leader and what you wanted your businesses to stand for as a leader. And this is often what we see when businesses grow. They grow very quickly, and ultimately they dilute to such a point that more than 51% of the business is not what the leader initially wanted, or what that entrepreneur or business owner ultimately wanted for their business. And so you end up with a business that fundamentally starts to change and become something else. Now, that doesn't always mean that it's going to be a bad thing, but it's just not going to be what it was for you as the leader. And so the concept of the Oros effect is, we have to implement a certain number of strategies to ensure as leaders that we keep our concentrate right down to the lowest level. And the stronger we can make the concentrate down to the general worker, the security guard at the entrance, the better we'll be. And I make reference to, the janitor at JFK at NASA, when John F. Kennedy asked the janitor, what do you do? And he said, he was expecting the janitor to say, well, I'm a janitor, I do the cleaning. But he said, I'm here to help put a man on the moon. And I think the concept of that is the same. That cleaner wasn't just doing that. They understood why they were doing what they were doing. And they knew the vision, they knew the values, and they just realized that they were contributing towards a bigger mission. And I think ultimately, when people understand that, they find their purpose, they're happy to come to work, they want to wake up, they want to do all the things that they want to do. And I guess, that's how you build companies that ultimately can scale.
So talking about scaling, how on earth have you managed to get that happening? I mean, I just think it's unreal, and it's across continents and cultures and people. So, how have you done that and worked across those countries?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I think the concept ultimately doesn't change, based on geography or where you are. There's obviously method. I mean, I've given you a really basic story about, what the concept of the Oros effect is, but ultimately, there's sort of different ways of doing it. So I'll give you some. I mean, I can give various case studies here, but if you look at the business that we started in South Africa in 2012, which was not too long ago, 11 years ago. We started in a garage, had an office of 3 people. It was very much everything that I wanted it to be, right? That business scale, to give perspective, the first year went, I think it was something like 280 odd people, 489, 900 and something, 1,200, 1,800. over a period of 5 years. So we scaled extremely rapidly. And obviously, I'd learned lessons from my corporate career, which spanned sort of 15 years or 14 years prior to that. But what I recognized is that I have to find mechanisms to be able to deliver what's sitting in my head to every single person. And so that's actually how I became so involved in technology, because I realized that I could not do that without using technology, because I couldn't physically find 100 Jasons to run around and train people on the way that I think about things. So my main focus at that point in time was to say, I'm going to use technology. I'm going to transfer, the way I do things into visual aids. We're going to put visual training modules together. Watch people could watch videos. So if I hired 10 people, they could come in, they could watch the videos. They could be trained on the videos, write quizzes on the videos. And so it started there. And we sort of progressed that up into more advanced. We were in the industrial space. So more advanced training like virtual reality. And we started to adopt augmented. And this was back in 2016. And so by doing all of those are the little symbols. If you move forward to other businesses, the Middle East business was a very static business. It was in scaffolding. It's a very dull, boring, again, company. And it was very much a plank and sort of metal business. When I came in there, I said, look, in my head, I see, the Google of construction. I see a bright and bold, young, energetic team. That's my vision. That's what I want. And so the way that I had to do that was to say, let me reinvent the office. So, rip out the tables, rip out the chairs, put bean bags in all colors. The office was quotes all over the walls and put TV screens everywhere, make it all digital because we were on a digital transformation process. And so it was kind of showing people what was in my head, but in a physical way. And so these are just some of the symbols that you can implement to be able to ultimately share that Oros, pour that Oros over the people. And then we also have an onboarding process, which is really where it all starts. And a lot of this is in the book, but every employee that joins the organization bag, and sort of that bag is a symbol. It's a symbol of the whole Oros effect. So it's everything that I wanted to understand. So the first thing is the bag represents something. The bag represents we're in tough industries. We beat each other up all day. We get shouted at by clients. But the reality is, when we're under stress, we need to keep our shit together. And so keep it in your bag, and that's the symbol of the bag. When you open up the bag, there's a T-shirt with your name. The whole concept is of a team. And remember that players can be kicked off a team. So if you're going to abuse the rest of your team and you're not going to play as a team, no matter how good you are, you're going to be kicked off the team. Every person got a coffee mug with their name, and the whole thing was about that. You need to make sure that a lot of innovation happens at the coffee coolers at the concept. We had the Red Bull cans. Actually, there's one here. It's not mine, but Red Bull cans. And the whole concept of the Red Bull was we hire people with energy over skills. So, if you want to join this business, you need to be full of energy. And the Red Bull is a reminder that this is the type of character that we want you to be when you work in our organization. And this kind of went on. There's a few other things in the goodie bags. But at the end of the day, and of course, there's a mini bottle of Oros. And, the last question that gets asked is, why is there a bottle of Oros? And the natural answer is, well, then you start the whole story about the Oros effect. And so this is a concept that we use just to translate and transfer everything that's been sitting up here down into the employee to make sure that they understand what type of people I want, the way I want the businesses run, the way I want them to think, act, behave, etc.
So Jason, thinking about that, when you hire or people in your organization hire, obviously there's skills that you need to have, certain skills that you're looking for. Are you saying that kind of hiring on attitude is a big thing
Yeah,
you?
for me personally, I always just attitude over skill. Skill can be trained in pretty much anybody. Attitude is very it stems a lot from your background and a lot from the things that you've been through and the weight and the baggage that you carry. And so we really try and find people that don't carry the baggage and really want to focus on the future. And I think ultimately by focusing on the future, ultimately you build. By focusing on the past, carrying the baggage, I mean, all you do is break things down. I mean, very much symbolic of what's happening with like politics and this around the world and even in South Africa. So, but yeah, I really try and get people to look forward. And I always say, you come with the right attitude, ultimately we can train you for the job that you need to do. And we've had several cases. I mean, I can tell you, I've taken a guy that was in prison, brought him in as a general worker because he really was desperate, given him an opportunity at a second life. Guys ending up running million rand sites, tens of million rand sites for us. You know, like in a young lady that basically came from nowhere, worked through the ranks, bought a car, bought a house, just because she's had the right attitude. We've trained her, we've given her the skill sets. And so I think that's the big focus point. And ultimately what that does is a few things, right? As business owners, we get a lot more loyalty than we would typically get. And I think that sorry, I just saw that thing as a leader in my organization. I'm a firm believer of attitude over skills. Very good. So yeah, so you know, you get a lot more loyalty, and we've find is that people that have the right attitude ultimately are willing to learn. Very often the people that have the skill with the bad attitude are never willing to change, willing to adopt. And so I guess a negative energy, which again to the Oros and to the Red Bulls and all these types. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, you've got the skills, so I know everything, which you can't possibly ever know everything. And I suppose as you're going along and you're learning and you're meeting new people, you see, you know, yeah, you know a lot, but there's so much that you don't know and then more that you can do. So I see Shamina's got a question that, so she's wanted to know, how do you know that the person you want to hire has the right attitude? She's looking for a few tips. Because in an interview, I mean, people can come.
yeah. So
how do you do
yeah, I
that?
think very much actually it comes down to a lot of the interview questions that people ask. So, you know, a big thing that I think. Now, look, I'm not saying that this is the only way, right? There's various ways of doing this, but I'll give you some examples. In our organization, pretty much down to the receptionist will interview the person. Now, that requires a lot of dedication and time and commitment from me personally, but I also understand the value that that brings. And I think you learn a lot from speaking to people. You know, the typical interview process is, you know, I don't know, if you're coming for a engineering job, how do you do this? How do you build that? How do you construct? You know, I think a lot of my questions are very much like putting into scenario plays, and it's I use a really interesting one, which I think is fun. Maybe it's just me, but I use the driving test skill. And so I'll say to people, you know, you're coming for an interview, and I'll give them this whole story. You're coming for an interview. You get to the interview. All of a sudden I can't meet with you because I'm running late. But I say to you, know what? Come drive me to my next appointment. But I've only got like 30 minutes to get there, and we know that it's going to take 50 minutes to get there. Now, what do? There's, you know, I know if I don't get to that meeting, I'm going to lose a huge deal. You're now sitting in the car, and you've got two options, or a few options. The one is that you have to go through some red robots, traffic lights, to be able to get there, to get me there on time. You have to break some rules to get me there on time. You know, and I'll play a couple of scenarios to the. I don't want in case any of the people on this will end up coming to work for us one day, but um, but ultimately I do that test, and really what I'm trying to gauge is how does this person react and think about situations in life. You know, what's important is it about, oh no, I'm going to break every single rule and put people's lives in danger because I need to get there on time? Is it going to be, oh no, I'm not going to break any rules when you know the criticality of doing something? And so it's a blend of, well, I would certainly, if I saw that there was a really safe rule that I could break in a safe way, I'd probably break it to get you there. As long as it wasn't going to put anybody in danger or risk the business or risk you as a CEO, etc. And so you're just trying to see how their mindsets are working. We'll do things on a farm. If you're you're out on a farm and you don't know what to do, windmill breaks, and a lot of people don't know what the windmills are. And they'll be, I'll go and I'll spend an hour trying to figure it out. And really, again, you're just testing what is their thought process. Are they looking? Would they phone a friend? Would they spend hours? And 9 times out of 10, I'm just looking for. I'll go ask Google, right? Because it's going to probably have the answer. And if Google can't give it to me in 5 minutes, well, then I'm going to go and I'm going to try to find the supervisor on the farm or something. And if they can't, I'm going to go look it up and dial out. Rather than the person says, I'm going to spend 3 days trying to fix this problem myself, And so it's testing different things that ultimately you're learning about how people think about things. And I think that's all part of an attitude process. You're learning that they're not arrogant. You're learning that they work as teams. You're learning that they're not going to spend days trying to figure out a problem. If they've got a problem, they're going to use the resources they have to sort it out. And ultimately, then you can teach them all the other skills.
Yeah. So, just thinking about those scenarios, which is, I'm actually going to do that because it's very interesting to see, a lot of people work better, say, individually. However, you are always still part of a team. And you need to be able to communicate that and say, listen, I'm not managing with this. What are your ideas? And to be more curious, I would expect, is that something that you like your employees to be?
We, again, without emphasizing it too much, I think, the whole onboarding process is very much about, we don't expect you to have all the answers. We don't expect you to be the whiz kid, but we do expect you to participate, ask the questions, learn, and do all these things. So, again, there's no magic boxes for all these things, right? There's 20 different ways of doing them. There's 20 different ways of finding people with different types of attitudes and different types of skill sets. But I think at the end of the day, it's just being able to understand a person and just make sure that they understand what it is that you want as a leader. Because make no mistake, there are some industries that require somebody with 100% skills and zero attitude, right? If you're a NASA, if you're landing a space shuttle on the moon, we don't want you to have no skills, right?
No,
we need skills. Like attitude, we don't care. You can shout at people, you can do whatever you want. That's $1 billion rocket that needs to land on the moon. So I think, again, different strokes, different folks, but ultimately it's finding the right fit and balance for your own business.
Yeah, that makes so much sense, I think, and especially with things changing as quickly as they are changing, we need people in certain industries, like you say, who can think differently, and in some of those future skills that we're looking for. So one of the things that I also wanted to just go back to the book, 2 things that I wanted to ask you. So from a leadership point of view, and often I think this is kind of neglected when people join organizations. So I think, what you're telling us about the onboarding process and the way you get ready for that specific person to come into your organization. You've got their name. You don't forget that Jason's joining on the 1st of June or something like that. So do you think from a organization as a whole perspective, that is one of the key things that needs to be focused on a bit more than it is, perhaps? in your, say, past dealings in your corporate life and that?
100%. I think it's probably one of the most underrated items because it sets the tone. You know, I was in the police force, as many people might know, and one of the things is when you step in, your commanders, etc., they were very disciplined, right from the start. There was no like, oh, we're going to befriend you, and then it was like they whipped you into shape on day one, and that kind of sets the framework for everything else. So I think that the onboarding process is something that most companies, even ourselves, we don't get it right. We still, human capital. We call it human capital, not human resource, by the way, because we don't think people are resources. I wish Milpark would change it from human resources to human capital, and people are assets. So but the onboarding process does get, I think, severely mixed. People, it's a tick box exercise rather than actually what's the real value that it can create for an organization. And by doing the right onboarding process, making sure that they understand the business, your ideas, the different departments, how they all function, fit in together. I think that's super critical. One of the things that we're piloting now, I think, is potentially going to be quite game changing, is we're scattered all over. And it's all good and well. We can do a presentation and we can tell our team in the UK, oh yeah, we have a business in South Africa, and they're in oil and gas and nuclear and power, and they don't really know what that means. Likewise, we can say, we do Formula One and we do this in the Middle East, and people will be like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. They think racing cars. So what we're trying to do now is actually take them on a virtual reality experience where on their onboarding, they get welcomed virtually by myself in a 3-dimensional space. They can then actually get taken through the building in the Middle East, taken out into the yard, to go see our factory, go see all the storage. Because the mind once it's seen what it's seen, it never forgets, right? But it never remembers what it reads. It's the 80-20 rule. So by doing that, when they're now talking about our, let's call it, our Dubai yard, they exactly know what it is because they've physically seen it, even though they haven't seen it. They know our office because they've walked down the passages. They've been taken down in VR. Our film studios in the UK, the same concept. We can talk about our film studios, but how do I expect the guys in the Middle East to market the film studios if they've never really seen them? And the only other option is to take them all on an airplane, fly them to the UK, because these are big assets, so we can't just move them. It's not like a Lego or Gymkhana set. So I think by being able to actually take people into those spaces and let them physically stand there and experience them as part of their onboarding is super useful. And so that's the next phase, I would say, of our onboarding process, which we think will be a game changer.
Yeah. Well, I think that's awesome. And I think just equating that to education and say the MBA, I'm going to ask you, how did your MBA help you in your future endeavors? But if what you're talking about now, from an onboarding perspective, imagine if we could have done that when you did your MBA. It's possible now.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, again, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, but there's certain times that VR is going to work well, and we're heavily involved in the virtual reality space, so there's a lot of junk out there, and there's marketing stuff that looks cool but adds no value. I think at the end of the day, in business, it's going to be applicable. I think for orientation, for example, at a Milpark, it's much easier because you're coming to a central location, and so it's not necessarily a value add for Milpark, right? It's more of a gimmick. But when you're centralized and you're spread all over, it's very different. And so I think that's where businesses lose that opportunity to give the people the experience of what whole business feels like, with all its different operations, with its different offices around the country that many people, to be quite honest, will never go to except managers. And then if the managers are bad at pouring the Oros down the layers, ultimately you end up with a very diluted workforce, staff, crew, whatever you want to call it. And ultimately that is not good for a business to be able to grow.
Yeah, makes sense. So thinking about that, I mean, when you decided, how long did it take you to write the book?
So the book itself wasn't too long. I mean, obviously we had COVID. Now, COVID for us, ironically, was an extremely busy time because we were building hospitals. We got contracted by the UAE government to build some field hospitals. So that was quite a big thing. In South Africa, we work on national key points. So, all the national key points were still running. I think, sorry, what was the question?
Just how long did it take you to
Oh,
physically?
the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in between this, I was trying to write the book and do a few things. I think at the end of the day, it kind of took about 18 months, I would say, to get sort of in its totality. But I could have done it in, I don't know, I guess 2 or 3 months, actually, if I just put my mind to it. The problem is obviously you have all these other things to do. I think the key thing is that we've had some, as you know, by the name Oros, there's a little bit of trademark challenges here that we just needed to manage to make sure that, we weren't infringing, even though it's not about, it's not about the Oros product, it's about a concept. But at the end of the day, we just needed to we needed to deal with some legal stuff on that, which has taken it a bit longer. And in fact, we're still dealing with some of that. So there may be a slight name change at some point in time before it launches, which is hopefully going to be this month. But yeah, I think overall, it's not, writing a book is actually not a complicated thing, and anybody can write a book. All you're doing is you're putting down, if you know one thing better than somebody else, or one thing more than somebody else, ultimately you're an expert in that topic to them, and so you will always have an audience. And I think that's key. I just want to quickly go and turn on a light here because I see that it's getting dark around me quite quickly. So just give me 1 second, please.
No worries. That's stunning. So I think just to talk to some of the audience here, and I'm talking to perhaps people who are doing their dissertations or their doctorates. So I mean, Jason has written a book in 18 months with doing research, getting it edited, all those technical things, plus patent issues or trademark issues. So to people writing up your dissertations, and I think we've got MBA students on now who are busy with their dissertations, and people doing their PhDs, and it does take that dedication. Thinking about that, Jason, what are some of the surprising things that you learned or kind of went ding while doing the book? What kind of came at you?
So it was very interesting actually, because there was some good learnings. I think one of them was, you've seen that I've called myself the Chief Ecosystem Officer, and that's been something that I actually coined quite some time ago. I think it was sort of in late 17, early 18, and we could talk about that. But I think what I really recognized when I was doing the book was how much that became so relevant to me in terms of the concept of ecosystem, because I use, and I talk about this in my book as well. One example is being a helicopter pilot. When you're on the ground in a helicopter, there's a couple of levers, etc., for the non-helicopter focused people. But you've got what you call a collective, which is what you pull for your power, and your cyclic, which you steer. There's a lot going on. You've got your pedals. When you're on the ground, especially if you could imagine having landed in a mining area, there's dump trucks driving around, there's cranes, there's just so much going on. There's big pipes, there's steam, when you're on the ground, it looks very overwhelming when you're in this helicopter. And as you sort of lift off the ground, you sort of raise. And as you get above the power plant or the mine, as you get further and further, you start to see this big power plant that was so overwhelming in front of you just slowly shrink into a little community. And around it, you see the factories and the little industrial hubs. And then you see all the trucks, and you see the coal mines at the back. And as it gets smaller and smaller as you get further and further away, that little plant is no longer daunting. And so I think as I was writing the book, it started to make me realize that, this whole concept of an ecosystem and just not being overwhelmed by this, that there's lots of pieces to these puzzles, that actually when you can find a way to bring them all together, it just helps the entire ecosystem work. And so yeah, so I definitely learned, not learned, but more reflected on that, I would say, a lot when I was writing the book. And it's the same analogy in the police. When you're in the police and you're in a gun battle, or you're right at the forefront of everything that's going on, it's chaotic, it's crazy, it's overwhelming. And if you could extract yourself out, you could start to recognize that it's actually not that bad. There's lots of ways to overcome it. If you use a drone and you just extract it, the scenario may not seem as intense. And so yeah, so I think that whole concept is something that I now actually think about more often. Whenever I'm in a stressful situation, I'm like, how bad is this really? And let me just pull myself out. Let me look at it, and I can give you another quick example. Sorry, but like one of my senior executives was saying to me the other day, no, one of our clients has taken, they've started to do some of this work that we provide for them themselves, and it was like a big thing. And I said, okay, let's just extract ourselves. And as I started to extract ourselves, I was like, okay, if we look at us as a group, this is less than 2% of our group. So is it a major issue? Actually, no, it's not. Let's focus our energy on getting 5% somewhere else, and that 2% becomes irrelevant. But when you're down there in the heated battle, then you just kind of look at it. And I think that the Oros effect has really helped me just identify that, as well as reinforce, obviously, the importance of the onboarding and the sharing the vision, the values, the beliefs that I have on a continuous basis. And so I do like weekly Q&A calls, or bi-weekly Q&A calls with the whole company. They can come on, they can ask me any questions. I can give them updates about the business, what's going on. We have 2 days a week management calls, just to keep the management aligned with what's going on. And these are all initiatives that I recognized add a lot of value, and I've just now continued to do them a lot more.
So you also, it seems to me that you're very focused on the people and the relationships within your group. Not just telling, but actually that communication element from top down, up, bottom up. Do you find that that's a worthwhile? Is it worth your time to do this?
No, so I'm a big believer in communication. I think, again, it's one of the biggest underestimated things. I'd love to know, maybe not this call, but if you have a lot of people that work for companies, how much time the CEOs of those businesses actually give them, and give them the flexibility to be able to ask them questions and do all of those things. And I think that I'm a big believer in it. I think that you've got to keep communication open. You've got to have the conversations that are important, and you've got to allow the space for people to ask the questions. And the other thing is, like, you've got to give people the space to be able to innovate. And this is a different form of communication, but give them the space to innovate. And the way you do that is by creating the safe spaces for them to talk without feeling intimidated, or without them feeling that they're going to be laughed at, or that their decision, their proposal is going to be, sort of sidelined. And so we run innovation jams, as an example, where we will say to people, if you were the CEO for a day and you could change anything in this business, what would you do? And more importantly, how would you do it? Because it's very easy for people to say, oh no, I'd fire, half the company, and I'd just implement new procedure. Like, well, that's good and well, but how? Tell me how. Because when you tell me they have to write down the how, it's a lot harder. And all these are different ways of engaging in communication with people. So we try and keep as many communication channels as open as possible, rather than just emails. But the Q&A sessions for me are super important, and like a monthly town hall. Those types of things are really important for people.
Very valuable. And do you find, as you've said, you're over 3 continents. I know a lot of organizations who've suddenly moved to remote working, as a result of COVID, they are really struggling with team dynamics, trust issues, leadership issues. And it looks to me as though you kind of got the answer there. So maybe there's another book in that, Jason. As you say, it's not just emails or, I don't know, newsletters or, it's that constant communication, and that you seem to be accessible to people, that they, even though you're so busy.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, leaders need to remember that they're only as successful as their teams, right? So I could be the best leader in the world if I don't have people behind me that, and that's this old story. What's the definition of leadership? I mean, there's 40, there's many, many, many variations of leadership. But to me, it's very simple. It's how many people follow you. Like how many people are going to, fight the battle with you. So if you're a bad leader, people won't fight. They're not going to support you in battle. But if you're a good leader, people are going to support you in battle. So I think having that open door and having that ability for people to be able to reach out to you is important. I, for example, and maybe this has gone a little bit too far, but for example, my telephone number is the emergency telephone number on our company websites, and so and this is a culture, talking about the Oros effect. This is something I started. My CEO is now underneath running different companies. Their number is on their websites as the 24-hour emergency number. And the reason why is because we want to lead example and say, if we can receive the telephone call at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., and on the weekends, why can't you? Because you always want to say you want to be promoted, you want to become the new boss, you want to become the executives. There's sacrifices that you need to make in order to do this. And so, I'll put it there, and I'll get people contacting me saying, I'd like a job. And some people saying, I want a job, and again, as a leader, I could turn around and say, listen, if you're going to talk to me like that, get lost. I also understand people come from different backgrounds. Some are educated, some are not. And so I deal with them in a very different way to, I think, a lot of people would. I mean, I'll take the call and I'll say, okay, I'm going to send you a number. Just send me a WhatsApp. I'll send you the email address where to send to, or here's the person to contact. And a lot of my team often say to me, are you crazy? Like, why are you doing this? Like, because you never know, right? I've hired some amazing people that have come from absolutely nothing. They've been some of my star achievers because they just come and they come with it. You've given them the break and the opportunity, and ultimately they become so loyal and dedicated to you that it's infectious. So I think that's something that I continue to do. I don't know how long I'll be able to do it, but my number remains, and so anybody can reach out to me directly, like it's there. But I just don't advertise that it's my number necessarily. But yeah.
Okay, so we'll keep that under wraps with everybody here. That they don't go and tell the rest of the world that it is actually your number. But I think that's amazing. I really do, because you don't often find that. People are willing to be contacted whenever. So I think that's really inspirational, Jason. And from just looking from a leadership perspective, a management perspective, and us in South Africa, we need to have that sharing, that mindset. So I think that's another takeaway for me. You've given me quite a few. So for other aspiring authors and entrepreneurs, what kind of advice would you give them? I'm not sure if we've lost Jason through load shedding. I'm by myself now. We can't seem to get Jason back, but please, everybody, we'd encourage you, if you have further questions that might just pop into your mind later this evening, let us know, because we're going to we can compile some of those questions that Jason can then answer for us, and we'll put it on social media. And then again, we'll follow up with him as soon as the book is published. And I mean, yeah, we keen to, be looking at it, promoting it, and getting as many people to dive into it, because I think that Jason has got really good points in there. So I'd like to say thank you all very much for your time. I've really enjoyed getting to know Jason more, and I hope you are all warm and safe and have some power. And we look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. So I'm going to say good evening and thank you all so very much, and take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Good night.